let's just say one of the runners can't afford sprints. It looks on the face of it like it's the same, but the experience, the labor involved for that runner who does not have the equipment that every other runner has is going to be quite different. And that is why historically black people, especially black elders, have said to get as much as a white person, you're going to have to be twice as good, you're going to have to work twice as hard, you're going to have to work twice as long. Because the reality is, at this point, we shouldn't have to give each other analogies. We should understand that the game is quite rigged. I understand that that's not understandable, but I thought in my mind as I was reading my script, I feared for Katima's life. You would say, why? She's rather healthy. She got right up. Heck, she got up and I couldn't get up. She did it twice. But I know that the rates of black maternal death are so incredibly high that it gives me pause when I think of a black woman who's expecting a child, because I really have to think, is she gonna make it out of the ER or the delivery room or wherever this birth may take place? I have to think the same thing as I got in my car from Nashville and sped down here so that I can get to Raising Cane's before this event. I had to think, be safe, because you don't want to get pulled over. Not because I don't want to get a ticket, but because I don't want to get dead, right? And that's the same consciousness that black people take with them. I think about Karen's comments about being a child and being afraid. If a white mother, father, and child were all afraid of the Ku Klux Klan, can you imagine what black women, children, and men would have felt on that day? And so that is what we are asking, not that you understand. I know Reverend Whitlock is he's a man of God, and I'm a woman of church online, so we're not quite in the same place. But black people have for the better part of 400 years now been calling, pleading, praying, asking white people to see our humanity. To love us might actually be the wrong plea, because you're hard pressed to find a white person that doesn't love at least one black person. You love us, okay? You have that capacity, right? But are you willing to shirk privilege? Are you willing, then I'll close, are you willing not to give the kid who doesn't have a ride to the track a ride so he doesn't have to walk, so he's not tired by the time the race starts? Are you willing not necessarily to buy the kid who doesn't have a pair of sprints? Because that's in some ways the easier thing. Are you willing to step out of your shoes? Are you willing to run barefoot? Are you willing to have things be equal and equitable if it means making you uncomfortable? See, we're not talking about making black folk comfortable, okay? Making black folk better, giving black folk more. We're talking about less. And that's why we've come this far, and we ain't likely to get no further no time soon. Unless white people are willing to shirk privilege, are willing to get out of the sprints, and are willing to equalize the playing field.
Christy, I had one.
Yes.
As I right now voting rights are big across the country. And if you think about back in 1965, we passed a Voting Rights Act, and Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act meant that if you were from a historically segregated place in America, if you were from certain states and you wanted to change your voting laws, you had to get pre-clearance, right? In 2014, in Shelby County versus Holder, Chief Justice Roberts said, we've achieved equality. We're there. We've achieved equality. And so immediately, across the South, states like North Carolina and Oklahoma and Texas started passing the same kind of thing that they had pre-1965, voter suppression laws. They did not achieve equity by doing that. The court only went for equality, not looking into the hearts of Southern legislators who saw an advantage into going back to Jim Crow voting laws. So that's what I thought of when I thought of the difference between equality and equity.
Excellent. See, you could have gone.
I know.
Was right.
You still scared me.
Yeah, I did. I had to wake you up a little bit. Okay, guys, we will move on to the next group. That is Katima Smith-Willis, Lisa Unger, and Amelia Berry. And the question I pose to you all is, how often do you talk about race and racism with your children? And do you feel equipped to discuss race with them? Let's start with Amelia.
Sure. I have two children, 8-year-old and an 11-year-old, and I talk with them about race and racism on a pretty regular basis. I would say at least once a week. For the most part, it's just as we go about our day-to-day lives, there's enough that comes up in our paths that gives me things to share with them. So, we certainly talk a lot about privilege. The first time I remember sharing that with my daughter, she was in 3rd grade, and I picked her up from school, and the weather had turned, and she was cold, and she had been with my mother the night before and left her sweater in the car. Well, it just so happened I looked across the street, and my mom's car was in the shop there on 2nd Street, and it was sitting outside, and we walked across the street, and I opened the door, and I grabbed her sweater out, and we were walking down the block, and kind of stopped cold in my tracks and thought, wow, that was an example of white privilege. So the rest of the walk home, I talked to the kids about the fact that I could do that, and and even knowing that the owner of the shop might come out and say, hey, what are you doing? And even if that happened, that I would feel that I could talk my way out of it and be fine and not have to think twice about my safety or the kids' safety. I said that's white privilege, and so that was the first time that I talked with her. But since then it comes up, and she asks about it. We were walking out of the store one day, and the alarm goes off for the merchandise, and the cashier waves us on, and that's so these examples they come up in our day-to-day lives. I also talk with her about my experience growing up in over the Rhine in Cincinnati. It was a neighborhood that was 95% black, and so from seeing that, seeing the some things that I was able to see then as a child, but much more now looking back, and the inequities. And I talk with her about my work, which is in substance use prevention, and we talk about I talked to her about the opioid epidemic and the difference between the way that society responds, and not just police, the legislators and the public, and the public is who puts the legislators there, right? So and how just the way that expresses the extent to which we as a society value black lives differently than white lives, and that my children need to understand that, because you can go through the world as a white person and ignore it. So I think that, the very least that I can do is make sure that that doesn't happen. We talk when we watch movies and television shows, what kind of representation is there? Are black people always the villain? Are they always the victim? Are there these tropes? Are these real whole portrayals of real whole people? There again, I've heard my daughter talk with her friends about that, and she'll say things, as we're watching another movie. Well, Mom, I don't really like the way that they, these people. There was an adaptation, and she said, "Hey, in the other show, in the original, these people were dark, and now they're light, and why did they do that?" And so I guess as far as equipped, I basically feel equipped. I feel, I do consult, I can Google something if I feel like I need more information, but, to me, I don't mean to say that it's not complicated. I know that there's a lot of complexity, but the basics that would let you talk to children, it's pretty simple, It's about basic fairness, equality, justice, love, and kids will ask questions in a way that adults won't. There'll be transparent. My daughter asked me one time when all of the protests were going on last summer. She said, "Mom, should I feel guilty?" What if adults would ask that rather than just say, "Well, I don't need to feel guilty"? She asked me, and I said, "Well," I don't think you need to feel guilty because I don't think you did anything wrong. But then we talked about all the ways that she benefits and that we benefit from the legacy of the history, and that on the flip side, other people don't just not benefit, but they have their lives and liberties and freedoms threatened every day because of the same history, and so that puts a responsibility on us, and that's different from guilt. Next time I'm going to call you, Katima. How's that sound? You don't have anything else to do with your time, do you?
Okay, just go ahead, give me a call. So I'm currently expecting a child. He's due in October, and it's a little boy. Makes it super. Thank you. I am expecting my first child. My husband also has a 10-year-old son, so that is also an age that we have to talk about these things. I like to pay homage when it's due. I grew up in a rather shaky household, but I do pay a lot of homage to my mother. She raised me to be who I am today. I grew up in a religion where we learned to love everybody, so that's kind of where my love started to grow for people and for who I am today. And I went to Second Street School growing up, so I went to a predominant, I guess you could have called it a predominantly black school at the time. But I grew up downtown, so I seen more so black kids every day growing up than what I did when I became a preteen. So my mother decided to be a bus driver for the school system. We lived in Franklin County District, so that was a huge switch. I went to Elkhorn Middle School, and then I went to Franklin County High School. I'm always gonna be a flyer at heart. I love the school, but that's where I experienced my first kind of run-ins with race and having to learn what my mother instilled in me, which is love, and that's where those conversations came from that I had to think back on. I can't sit up here and say that I'm perfect because I got into quite a few fistfights in school with words that I knew were wrong. My mom and my dad, we would sit down and have these conversations that I'm gonna have to have with my son and the son that we have at the house right now. So that's what I wanted to say first, because my mom really helped mold me into the woman I am today and the person I was growing throughout high school. So do I feel equipped? I feel fully equipped. We have a great support system. For our gender reveal, we asked people to buy the baby books, so we did books for baby. I like to read personally. I've always been a huge reader. So I wanted to, because I like to read to the baby now, and I want to read to him when he gets here as well, and I want him to find his own love for reading or rap or whatever he decides to do, I want him to do it with all the love in his heart. So I'm starting now. So going back to my support system, it's crazy because going back to my introduction, I am one of the main people that organizes some of the events here in Frankfurt. It's For the People Coalition. We organized one of the largest marches last year here in Frankfurt. We walked from the old Capitol to the new Capitol, and that's kind of where I started networking with the community, and people started to know who I was. I started getting introduced to people in the community. It was a really awesome experience. We just had the one this year. So my support system has grown from what I've always known for it to be. So the books that we got in at our gender reveal were super cute books, of course. There was Woke Baby. It has a little black baby on the front with his fist up. It's just, they're really cute. But, and then there's the ABCs of Black History. That's one that we actually got from my friends out in California. They sent it in the mail. People know my heart. People know my husband's heart, and the child that we're gonna raise. So the resources, I have all of them. I've experienced things in life, and I see things every day. I shake hands with politicians. I shake hands with people in the hood. I have a very large amount of resources to always go back to. But the things that I've learned throughout this process is love, which is number one. And two, which goes back to Reverend Whitlock, is some people are born with hate in their heart, and their family raises them in situations like this. So those conversations that we're gonna have with our son is gonna be from love, and then he's gonna experience things. He's gonna have to learn what police brutality is. These are uncomfortable conversations that white families unfortunately do not have to have with their children, but we have to have it with ours. And I am going to make sure that my son has all the resources that he needs. And of course, before I have my baby, my friends have kids, and they're Black kids, and there's white kids as well, but it's 2021. These are things that we should be teaching in schools. These are things that the ABCs of Black History should be in the library at Franklin County High School for a white kid to be able to pick up to learn the ABCs of Black History. So yes, I feel fully equipped, but I'm always still open to learn. I love learning. I love things like this because I have people that ran into the Ku Klux Klan in the streets to people that sit on our city board here, our city commission, Frankfurt, that I can always refer back to and have these open conversations. And then even on the local level, I push it up to the House and the Senate. You need to have these conversations on the floor. We need to be in those galleries because they have to have these conversations as well. We're not gonna progress forward as a state or the United States until we have these conversations, so our kids won't have to continuously have to have them.
Well, while I was thinking about this question today, while the kids were running around crazy in the house and my husband Daniel was around, I thought of Katima. I thought of you, and I was so thankful that really your march with For the People Coalition sparked one of probably the biggest conversations that I had with my 3-year-old and 1-year-old last year. So knowing you were going to have the march, it was Breonna Taylor's birthday. We had a bit of a painting party the night before and made a big Black Lives Matter sign, and also prepped a couple small signs that we could hand out to people that were participating. And so that was really one of the first times that we talked to our son Sam and Ruby, and it just really gave me goosebumps to sit and think about all these conversations we've had over the past year and a half, and how these conversations are even gonna change and evolve as they get older. Yeah, so thank you. I thought about you a lot today.
Thank you.
But and I still have, a year later, we still have a Black Lives Matter sign up on our front porch. If any of you know where Lewis Street is here in town, you've seen it. So that sign has sparked a lot of different conversations with our children, with people in the community. Some negative conversations or feelings as well. People driving through. We had a couple Trump parades come through town over the past year, and guys driving through on with their Confederate flags and their trucks, staring us down as we're on our front porch because they see the sign. So, just those little moments were times that my husband Daniel and I could sort of start these conversations. So, I think explaining race and racism can be really difficult, and I know I struggle with it. It's hard to be up on this stage. It's hard to have these conversations, but I'm really honored to be here and keep growing and learning and listening. And just being there with my kids, sometimes it feels like I'm learning with them. I'm finding out ways to talk to them. They're so young. How can I help show them diversity? And that comes in many different ways. I think my husband Daniel and I really focus on bringing in certain music and arts and books, and you mentioned all the books that you've been reading your son. It's really special. I hope as a parent, as a mother, even as a city commissioner, that I can be here, help make some positive change. I don't feel fully equipped. Like I said, I feel like I'm still learning, I'm still listening. I hope that, like Katima said, we can see our children learn the true history, and they need to realize and be able to question structures and the institutions that are really just rooted in white supremacy. So I hope I can do my part. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Panel members, does anybody else have anything they'd like to add to this one?
I do as a non-parent.
Yes, please.
What do you have to say? I will say this. First, I made mention of this earlier, and so I'm just going to circle back to it again. No matter how uncomfortable it may be and is for white people to talk to white children about race and racism, is nowhere near as uncomfortable as it is to be black and to be subject to racism. You got to be prepared to be uncomfortable. And you're here, so I'm not beating you over the head. I'm just letting you know. The other component is that I've been told by my mother that parenting is really hard. She's the mother of an only child, so you get the picture. And so I want to say that in as much as it is difficult for any parent to parent a child, any parent to have a conversation about difficult subject matter with children, I don't want you to think that it's easy for black folk to say to their child, when we go in the store, you don't touch anything. I mean, and we're not saying that it's just a matter of custom. We're saying that as a matter of preservation. Because listen here, when she said that she went over to that car and opened that door and took out that, I said, whoo-wee. I would never, with 14 years of tertiary education, with 4 degrees, including a PhD, I would never feel comfortable enough to do that. I would think that it could cost at the very least, a whole lot of trouble, right? And so that is what I want to remind you of, that black parents having to have the conversation about how black children must restrict themselves and their joy in public and in private spaces, because we have to police ourselves and we have to have respectability in order to have a fighting chance in the world. You gotta have your license ready, your registration ready, your insurance ready, because the truth is that while everything may be okay, everything may not be okay. And if it is the case that everything is not okay for a black man, a black woman, or even a black child, very, very few of us can fight the instinct that is not innate, but that is universal, because white supremacy is, that tells us in the back of our minds, the first instinct, they must have done something to deserve it. And that is what we are fighting. And that is what we are begging and pleading for white people to acknowledge.
You know, I had something really quick. I mean, as the moderator, I don't know if I'm supposed to add, but I want to, because it's a slightly different perspective, maybe. I, too, have no children, and my father, support, is Ed Poe, who wasn't able to be here, daughter of late Janice Poe. So you'd imagine that race was a hot topic in our house, but it wasn't. I am not from Kentucky. I'm from Illinois, Chicago, actually. And we lived in Streamwood, Illinois, I think maybe when I was 2 when my family moved there. My earliest memory of helping my parents, or my father actually, every Saturday morning, me and my father would clean eggs off of our garage door while my mom made waffles. And I thought it was just a normal thing. I noticed that nobody else in the neighborhood ever had eggs on their garage door, but it was kind of a family thing. Me and my dad would clean eggs off of a garage. My mom would make waffles. I'd go in, eat waffles, and read the comics. And I think finally one time I asked, why? Why am I cleaning eggs off the garage door? You know, why isn't anybody else? And we were the only black people in the neighborhood. So we got the eggs. And that was our conversation and my first introduction to a conversation about race. And my mom said, it's because we're black, they don't want us here. And that's kind of how it started. So it wasn't a sit down of, let me tell you about what happens. It was an in your face, this is racism, and this is what you're gonna have to deal with. I dealt with it in school. When I was moved aside, I was able to read at a very young age. My grandmother was a teacher, and so that was very important. But my teacher would separate me from the class and send me to the library. And my parents didn't know that until finally they said, you know, why aren't you with your class? Well, my teacher sends me away. Well, I didn't understand that that was also racism, that I was being separated, and felt it made to feel bad. I felt like I was doing something wrong because I couldn't be with my friends, I couldn't be with my peers. But again, until I got older, I didn't understand. So racism, it's also, you know, important for black families to talk to their children about it just as much as it is for white families, because I had to learn by it being in my face. And even though I've always learned by doing, that's a conversation that at such a young age, you know, I shouldn't have had to feel it. I shouldn't have had to know it, but I did, you know. So it doesn't matter how old your kids are, they're getting it. And those conversations should have been had in the homes of the children that were throwing the eggs. Had their parents had a conversation with them about racism, maybe I wouldn't have had to clean eggs off the garage every Saturday morning. So anyway, that's my story. Anybody else? Ready to move on? Okay, let's go on to the next question. This question is for Dr. Crystal DeGregory Ernie Lewis and Amelia Berry. And actually, this time we're going to start with Dr. DeGregory and we're going to end with Ernie, if that's okay, so we know our order, okay? So the question is, what is the significance of ethnic studies programs in schools? Why do we have specific racial ethnic history months? And why are they necessary?
That's a really good question. I'm just saying.
You listen.
Well,
Anybody ever had a box of crayons growing up? Anybody? Crayola was my brand of choice. I didn't like that other one. It was like waxy or whatever. But if you were a kid in grade school, at some point, it was really, really, really cool. Hold on now. I don't want to offend our elder attendees. So I'm hoping that the same was true for you. Did they have the big box of crayons with the sharpener? Okay, we're on the same page. Here we are. Okay. And if you had one of them, oh man, you were the coolest kid on the block. I know you was. Show you right. But if you pulled the crayon that said nude, did it look like black people? No. Okay. Anybody ever had a cut and worn a Band-Aid? You have? Do you know that that Band-Aid is flesh color? Does that seem to match darker hued people? No. Okay. Didn't think so. If you're a woman and you have gotten nude stockings, nude pumps, nude anything, did they tend to be nude for dark-skinned people? No. Right? This is how privilege works. Now you take that privilege of the assumption that those things that are nude are white, and if I ask you, I used to do this when I was in the classroom, and I was teaching at a historically black and overwhelmingly black college in Nashville. I would say, close your eyes. Everybody close their eyes, close their eyes, close their eyes. Is everybody closing their eyes? How many fingers do I have up? You shouldn't know. Okay, great. And if I ask you to imagine a person who was responsible for the building of this nation, a founding father, what do you see? A white man? An old white man. Does he have a wig? Now, I know the black man ain't got no wig now. You're not, if you've seen a black man, that's wonderful, right? But open your eyes, for the vast majority of us, that's the assumption. And because that is the representative history, you think that that is the representative authority. That is what it means to be American. And so every other American must distinguish themselves, must say, I am not what you imagine when you close your eyes and you see a founding father. My people are not who you see. And that is how we end up not with ethnic studies, but that is how we end up with a history that is his story. That old white man with the wig. And that is why all other people, including white women who don't yet know it in every instance, must work very, very, very hard so that these stories represent people who look like you, who experience what you experience, or who quite simply affirm your somebodyness. Years ago, a United Methodist minister said to me, "He who controls the image of God rules the world." And just as I asked you to close your eyes and imagine the founding father, if I asked you to close your eyes and imagine Jesus, the overwhelming majority of people would say a white guy with long hair turned to the side. I don't know if you had that in the picture of Jesus in the back of your Bible, but he didn't look brown. He didn't have locks. He didn't have anything that resembled someone like me. And so then it's easy to see that the order of the universe is ordered that way, with someone made in that image at the top. Everyone else gets in where they fit in. And that's why we have ethnic studies. Not because black people or brown people or Asian people didn't have a story. Because if you like money and you like guns, you got to like Asians. I mean, come on. The Chinese invented them both. No, you do realize that. The guns, right? But at the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak, you had people calling it the Chinese flu. So it makes it necessary, whether you're Chinese or black or Latino or even a white woman, to get some expert who will, at the appropriate time, in the appropriate room, be willing to make other people uncomfortable so that they can speak their own truth, their own lived experiences, so that it's not always an old white man's story. There are young white men, there are white women, and there are women and men and children of every other ethnic group on the face of this earth who are quite extraordinary, and extraordinary without privilege, extraordinary without supremacy, extraordinary in the face of having to combat all of those challenges. But like I told you, see, it can't be about you staying comfortable, okay, and trying to make it look equal. We came with cleats. We came with spikes. We practiced in our spikes. See, what I neglected to say is if 7 people get on the 100 dash line and 7 of them have practiced running in cleats, and you give the other remaining person a pair of cleats on that day, they can't run in them. They can't run in them. If you want to make things equal, you'd have to get out of your spikes. See? And so we already know. See, I love y'all, but I tell people, I told Diane Nash, and she did not like this. I don't know if you're familiar with her from the student sit-in movement. I said, Diane, love only gonna bring us so far. We're gonna need to have some justice, despite whether you love me or not, like me or not, think highly of me or not, whether I'm criminal or not, well put together or not, I am going to need to have what I am due. That is what justice is. And that's what we don't get in the regular school curriculum. And that's why we have all these, because they say, there's just not enough time to get. Well, you don't need to tell every white man's story there ever was. Cut some of them out. Okay? I don't need to know the apple fell on him under the tree. I don't. You don't need to know that. I mean, seriously. If you sit under a tree with fruit, if it's ripe, you sit there long enough, it's going to hit you. Right? And so that is what we're talking about, because on the one hand, while we'd love things to be equal and equitable and folk to do the right thing and for it to come from the right place, it's been well over 400 years now, right? And so if you can't do that, then let me do these things for myself. Let me affirm myself. Let me give you the opportunity to walk into my classroom and learn from my lived experience, even though it is not your own. And so when we have people who are reticent to study other people, to experience other people, black people we don't have a choice. We have to experience white people. We do. We experience you everywhere but the 11 o'clock hour on Sunday mornings, which is still the most segregated hour in America. Other than that, here you are in every other sphere of our lives. And so what we're asking you to do is come, take a walk in my shoes, sit in this seat, see how an obstructed view limits one's imagining of what is possible. I can't imagine winning a race if I don't ever see one because I'm behind the gate. And so what Karen said earlier is wonderful. Don't give me a box and her a box and me a higher box and this one a lower box. Take away the gate. Take away the gate. That is what the educational system does, in as much as that is what the church does. A lot of gatekeeping for white supremacy, because nobody wants to make other people uncomfortable. But black people are uncomfortable all the time. I must tell you this. I really, 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 really need you to understand how uncomfortable it is to see black death over and over and over again. And if it's not at the hands of police, it's at the hands of the coronavirus. And what do people say? Oh, their diets are different. That's why they're dying. Oh, they're heavier people. No, these are people with less access to preventative care. These are people who are hoarding into understaffed and underfunded medical facilities. These are people, once you get there, no matter how beautiful and wonderful you see Katima looks, she could be denied the quality of care that she needs because she's sensational, or she's expressive, or she's loud, or just because I don't want to and I don't have to do right by you. That's what these studies are telling you. And no matter how much I tell you or anyone on this stage tells you, you have to want to recognize that that is wrong. And then you got to go one step further. You got to be willing to be a part of making it right. And then the very furthest step is you have to do that even when that makes you uncomfortable.
Short straw is
But
mine
your
this
answer
time.
would be just as wonderful.
I tell you.
Thank you for that, Dr. DeGregory. I think you spoke a little bit to this knee-jerk reaction. I mean, you didn't mention it, but of white people who say, well, where's the White History Month? Because I'm in the K through 12 world, so we don't have ethnic studies so much as Black History Month and maybe Women's History Month. But the answer is basically White History Month is the other 11 months of the year, and
12.
also in February as well.
12, yeah.
And it reminds me, John A. Powell has a saying that whiteness is like the invisible third-person narrator in a novel. And I think, it's that invisibility that that allows white people to have this delusion that somehow what is basically a compensatory structure of ethnic studies programs or Black History Month, trying to make up for all of the things that are left out, is somehow unfair toward whites. It's really remarkable. But I was thinking about this just on a local basis, and I believe it was only last year that I actually remembered specifically that in ninth grade at Frankfurt High School, I was taught that the Civil War was not about slavery. I was explicitly taught that the Civil War was not about slavery, it was about states' rights. This was not, I don't know how old I look, but this was not in 1955, this was in the 1990s. Of course, that was a lie. And yet the fact that it was able to get through all of the systems that had to get through to get into the curriculum, that was not just being taught by my teacher, it was not just being taught in our school district, it was being taught at most schools throughout the southern United States. And we see the consequences of that lie. That was a lie, and we lied to our children about our history. And as a result, we are seeing I'm sure some people would say that was in the name of unity or, making people comfortable, which people, but now it's sown further division, much further division. And so, I guess bottom line, Black History Month, it's trying to, make up for a history that has been taught in unjust ways with a very incomplete picture that is based on that old white man's view and leaving out everyone else's. And that's a shame for all children. It's not just it's not just female children who lose out when we only tell men's history. It's not just Black children who lose out when we only tell white history. It's a better quality education for everybody if we include the richness of all of our history and experiences and perspectives.
When I think about history, it makes me angry. I grew up in Ferguson, Missouri, and went to the same high school that Michael Brown went to. Michael Brown, who was gunned down for walking in the middle of the street. And I think back to the history that I learned. I'm a 73-year-old man, so graduated from high school in '65, went to Baylor University, which had been segregated until 2 years before that, and graduated in 1969. And when I think back to history, I think that what is going on in my life, but also in this country right now, is a battle over narrative. We're battling over the narrative of our history in this country. And if you think about Juneteenth itself, it's a perfect symbol, because the slaveholders in Texas wanted another 2 years of labor out of those 250,000 slaves there. All they had to do was keep information from them, and they succeeded at that. And then you think about the lost cause. The lost cause is what the South has used since Reconstruction to try to create a narrative around what slavery was about and what the Civil War was about. And I think about my own education then, and think about your own education and what you learned about America, this exceptional country that is America. I was taught that all men were created equal. I was not taught that 12 of our presidents owned slaves. I was not taught that 8 of our presidents owned slaves while they were in the presidency. I was not taught that slaves created much of the wealth, both in the South and in the North. I was not taught that our Constitution had a fundamental compromise that put the seeds of the Civil War into it by saying that in order for slaveholders to keep power, they got to count 3/5 of their slaves as a person so that they had more representation in Congress. I wasn't taught that at all. I wasn't even taught that. I was taught that George Washington had wooden teeth. What I was not taught was that some of those teeth were the teeth of slaves. I learned that slaves were freed by the Civil War. Reconstruction lasted until 1876. What I didn't realize is that after 1876, virtual slavery was reimposed in the South through convict leasing so that slaves could be, or former slaves, could be arrested for loitering, for carrying a gun, for a variety of things, put into jail, and then leased back to mines and plantations where they were worked sometimes to death. I didn't learn about lynchings around the country, nor did I learn that lynching was not just a bunch of bad people in a mob, but it was a method for terrorizing black people to keep them in their place. I did not learn about Greenwood in Tulsa. I did not learn about the Red Summer in 1919, where blacks across the north, my home of St. Louis, East St. Louis, where black people were in the hundreds were killed by white mobs. I didn't learn about Rosewood, Florida, where an entire community of blacks were run out of town and killed over some similar allegation to what occurred in Tulsa. I didn't learn about the federal housing policies in the 30s and 40s and 50s that caused white people to accumulate wealth in housing, but that redlined blacks so that they could not accumulate wealth. And that continues to cause wealth disparity to this day. And now, and Christy, may I introduce just a little bit about critical race theory. Now we're continuing to battle over the narrative. Critical race theory, if you've been, and I do this to myself, I watch Fox News on occasion, just to see what is being taught to about 40% of the people in this country. And critical race theory, in reality, critical race theory is something that was started being taught in law schools in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I went to law school in the 70s. It was not taught at Washington University in St. Louis. It was not particularly significant at that time. But if you listen to Fox, if you listen to legislators around this country, the biggest thing attacking our children, threatening our children, is the teaching of critical race theory. And even in Kentucky right now, there is a pre-filed bill, BR 60, that has been filed by Joe Fisher from Northern Kentucky, that in essence would criminalize the teaching of critical race theory, not in those terms, but that would criminalize it. We have states. Let's see, Oklahoma. Let's see if I can find what Oklahoma's done. Well, Oklahoma and several other states have already passed critical race theory prohibitions, and that is the narrative that is spreading around the country. White people are afraid that their children are going to be taught about systemic racism, structural racism, so that's a bit of fear-mongering coming your way. So that's critical race theory. There are whole courses on it, but that's what's being fear-mongered right now.
I want to thank my panel and ask everyone to please give them another round of applause for all of their excellent, wonderful answers this evening. Thank you all so much. That is definitely something to research on your own. The bill that's been pre-filed by Representative Fisher, it's dangerous. It's so broad and general that it almost eliminates teachers feeling comfortable talking about anything that has anything to do with race, slavery, anything at all to do with even being different. Is going to be.
Christy, can I add something really
Yes,
quick?
please.
Just on that end, because I just want people to really realize how real this is. I'm not going to say the name of the teacher, but it happened here in Frankfurt. And when we did the march last year, I had a younger, she was about to be a senior. She just graduated this year. She had reached out to me about, did I go to Louisville during the protest? And I definitely went to Louisville. And of course the news, no matter what outlet you see, they showed stuff on fire. They showed things being thrown. They showed what they wanted everybody to think. This is what's really going on everywhere across America. They showed the part that they wanted everybody to get riled up about. Anyways, on a virtual class, the teacher had labeled people like me, because there were a lot of people like me, like my husband, like our friends that were there just doing our due diligence. We were checking on people, cleaning up trash, still there for the revolution, but we were also there just as humans fighting for what we're supposed to be fighting for. Anyways, the teacher labeled us as hoodlums. I think that's the word she used. Savages. There were some other words, and the girl recorded that. I think the teacher got in trouble. All this hoorah. Anyways, but then you're gonna have a representative write up a bill about not teaching things that should be taught in school to prevent teachers to say things like that. So you're saying one's wrong and then the other's right, because you're not banning things like that. You're not banning calling us hoodlums and savages, because we're not. But I just wanted to touch on that, because somebody is literally in Kentucky trying to stop these conversations that we should be having, but we're still allowing teachers to teach and labeling us the things that we're not.
Understandable.
Christy, I wanted to say one other thing about it. Just a couple of things that BR60 would do is keep teachers from teaching that anybody bears responsibility for actions committed in the past. Now think, how do you teach history if you don't talk about responsibility for things that occurred in the past? It would also ban the teaching of making people feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress on account of his or her race or sex. And then it would ban the teaching that the Commonwealth or the United States is fundamentally or irredeemably racist or sexist. Those are just three of the provisions of this bill that's been pre-filed.
Scary.
And I'm going to say something controversial. They're right, they're right. Like what he's saying, the person writing that bill is absolutely right. You know what they're right about? The intentionality. See, that's the point. The point of racist acts is to uphold racism. And so when the bill says to make no one uncomfortable, it really means no one white uncomfortable. See, that's the word that you don't have to say, because you already understand. I was on the road earlier this week. I saw a huge billboard sign, and so many of us are on one side or the other of the aisle on the matter of abortion, but every time I see a pro-life sign, it's always a white baby. It's always a white baby. And I want you to just look at it for yourself. As you drive up and down the highway, see what people are really saying. They are pro-white life, pro-white history, pro-white power, pro-white studies. And it's all about upholding the very systems that we are assembled on this stage trying to convey and to convince you that they actually exist. But all around you, you have all of these evidences that it does indeed exist, and that we all understand what is being said when it's not being said.
Right. Thank you. Very true. All right, guys. Well, now it's the time of night where we do have a few minutes left. So, did anyone think of any questions they would like to pose to the panel this evening? Yes. Come on up to the mic. right there. Thank you so much. Give them some support.
Or some of the same people that I see at a lot of the events that have been thrown here in Frankfurt. So like, for you guys to come out, it was like, you know, you guys want to be educated. So what I don't see is any of the local law enforcement here. So what I was wondering is, what do you guys feel the importance of coming to events like this is for? Like, what do you guys feel like they should come to educate themselves? Do you guys feel like, you know?
Karen?
I have to stand up when I talk. That is an excellent question, an excellent question. I brought a proposal for what we can do. I think this is an incredible time in American history. We finally began to talk about African American history in this nation with a federal holiday. I mean, that is phenomenal. This event was organized by that young woman there who just worked her butt off all week. Stand up, Melanie.
Thank you, Melanie. Yes.
And by EDPO, lots of EDPO, I can't name them all, but none of them were government people. And so I'm calling on our elected officials to think about this issue. Take this issue up. Take this issue up. How are we going to celebrate Juneteenth in 2022? We all are getting tired of calling everybody out and talking and not seeing anything happen. We're tired of it, you know? So my proposal is, and Judge Wells, I know that you're here, and I hope that our mayor is here.
Yes, he is.
Thank you, Mayor, for being here, because he was at the Juneteenth thing that we had today, and it was wonderful. But my proposal is that Frankfurt and Franklin County establish a Juneteenth commission and hold hearings and discussions all around this town with law enforcement, with health care, with housing authorities, with churches, and talk about what is really the status of our situation in Franklin County with African American people. What's the real situation? And what can we do? What can we do as a city, as a county, as organizations that care to make change? This is a huge time in American history. Juneteenth. You know, we passed a resolution calling on Mitch McConnell and Rand Paul and Andy Barr to pass Juneteenth legislation. And by God, they all voted for it. We were shocked. We were shocked. But it can't just be a day of celebration. It has to be a re-examination of this whole issue in our local communities, in every local community. So, Judge and Mayor, I got my proposal right here. I'll be glad to come to the City Commission and talk about it. Let's take action. Let's take action.
I'm gonna say something about Karen Druid. I'm not that nice. I love it. It should be mandatory straight across the board. It's to the point now where I'm personally so tired of asking and being nice. So for the law enforcement, it should be mandatory for them to come to things like this. That should be a part of their teaching. It takes them so many hours to be a police officer. If you ask me, it should take them a few years to be a police officer. You're putting a gun on your hip. I'm gonna keep it short, Christy, but that's what I think. It should be mandatory. I think that we should, especially here in Frankfurt, we got some cool cops, I guess you could say, but it should be mandatory. You should come to, it should be when you're off duty, outside of your khakis, outside of your gun and your badge hours, you need to be here in the crowd with your wife and kids probably, because it's to the point now where I'm tired of asking for it. You should be here.
I want to say this really quick, and then we have another question, and I do not want to keep you all here past 9, but One thing I want to say to each of their points, actually, Karen and Katima, I charge all of you with that responsibility. I love that I'm seeing these faces in this audience, but I've seen these faces in this type of audience before. We all know someone that thinks this is ridiculous. We all know the people that are commenting whenever we have wonderful, excerpts in the paper, people who are writing it in the paper to talk on these issues that comment about how ridiculous it is and how it's clickbait. Those are the ones that you need to bring with you here. Next time, they're the ones. I'm going to be bringing one of those people with me to this conversation because they're who we need in here. We want it to be a back and forth. I want to know what they're feeling just as much as I want them to hear what I'm feeling. This is not one-sided. So I charge all of you with that responsibility of getting those law enforcement officers in here, getting those neighbors that have a problem with everything that they're seeing, critical race theory being taught. I want you to get them in here. So that's all I'll say. We'll move on to our next question. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christy. Ernie, thank you for talking about BR 60. There's also another bill, BR 69, which is essentially the same thing as BR 60, except it extends it into post-secondary education. Almost the identical language in post-secondary education. It's BR 69. Decker was the one that put that in. So there's two out there for K through 12 and then post-secondary that we have to really go after. But thank you, Karen, for your comments about elected officials. I personally invited the governor's office and his staff, took invitations over to the annex, and we can see how that went. And so my question is to Christy's point, these are the usual suspects that we love, that we see all the time. How do we get those that aren't here to quit voting in a way that's hurting what we're talking about? Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just say I need some more of y'all to run for office?
No, really.
Any day.
I mean, that was a great. I just think it should be mandatory. Like I feel like it's across the board. Everybody should be here. We should.
But who makes it mandatory becomes the question. We can't just say it's mandatory. Those in office, those that we elect, then have to feel that it needs to be mandatory. We feel it needs to be mandatory, but we can't make that happen. So then we need to figure out how to make that happen. And not only that, I don't want you here because you feel like you have to be here. I want you here because you need to understand every perspective in your community, in the community that you are supposed to serve, that I've elected you to serve. I need you to understand my perspective, and I want to understand yours. So I don't know that I personally want it mandatory. That's just me personally.
No,
Now I've gone off on my...
Agree. But it takes applying pressure to the people that we put in those positions. I mean, we sit here and unfortunately, last year with COVID, we couldn't attend session, but we need to be, just like we go to sports games. So many people buy UK football and basketball tickets, it's unreal. Why aren't we literally walking into the Capitol during session, walking up to your city commissioners, walking up to your mayor? Should be 1-2 steps, and you express how you feel and apply that pressure. But it's the same people, just like you guys said, all the time. Invite your friends, just like you guys said. I just think that we need to be in these places that they are every time they're there, because at some point they're going to want to just stop hearing us and hear what we have to say.
Go ahead, Karen.
I'd just like to add that one way this was addressed today is at the South Frankfurt Park. I talked to some people about Juneteenth that I know had never heard about it before, and that all came about because some people, raised a little hell about that. Are you going to talk about Juneteenth on Juneteenth at one of our major parks in an African American community? And folks did. Elected officials did. Our minister here did. Our Representative Graham did. And there were enough of us there that weren't part of the organizers that could talk to just the crowd. And it was a wonderful thing. So that's one of the reasons I think we need to go outside venues like this. We need to go where people are. You know, we need to have an ice cream social in the park with some, you know, with anybody who can attend. You know, I've been working on civil rights issues for over 50 years, and I thought we had made some progress. We've made some, but every time we make a little, it slips. And so we just have to keep dedicated. Those of you who are in the ministry know that probably better than anybody. We're all backsliders. We're all backsliders. We got to keep recommitting ourselves to these issues. So I guess my suggestion is let's try to think more creatively about how to involve people and how to get not just the usual suspects that Joe was talking about. Thank you.
We'll take another question only because I don't want to cut you guys off. This is what this evening is for. I will tell you, you know, we're right at 9, so we'll do a couple more, and then we were going to end this with a soothing of our soul, with a wonderful song from Keith Dean, but I don't want to leave our community out. So let me go ahead and take 2 more questions, and then we'll try to wrap this evening up.
Hello, I'm Junius McMillan, Katima's little brother. A question for the panel. I've always wanted to be a police officer even before Black history has been started, so on and so forth. So for the panel, when would be a good time for police reform, for me to run for constable, sheriff, or for me to actually apply for a job for the police department?
Now.
Now, right now.
Yesterday.
Right now.
So y'all remember my faces, so whenever I run for sheriff, Junius McMillan.
Yeah, actually, I'll get your information, and
I'm so serious too, by the way. This is not a joke. It's always been my mind.
No, he's so
I'm for
serious.
the people. I've always been for the people. I care about everybody's well-being in here and their safety more than I feel like the police department, because you don't see them in here at the moment. You don't see the sheriffs or anything. So, Junius McMillan.
our sheriff's department is looking for interns, and but seriously, we'll get your information, and we'll make it happen. Definitely, right now.
I'm Tona Barkley, and I was working with KFTC, and we did an art show that Christy participated in. You know, to the question of getting outside the choir, I just wanted to share with you something that KFTC is going to be doing. Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, for those of you who don't know what it is, this summer. They're going to be doing training for volunteers in something that they call deep canvassing. And it's going to be preparing you to be able to go out and talk to people. I think it's going to be door to door, and about issues of race and climate change. And I'm planning on doing that. It scares the heck out of me, you know, just to go knock on somebody's door and say, the discomfort, you know. But I just feel like, I feel like, hey, I have all these neighbors who I know. I mean, some of them think like me, some of them don't think like me, but I don't ever talk to them about it. And I want to know how. So I just throw that out as a possible path to get that training and go talk to people who don't think like us.
I think that's amazing. It's amazing. Yes, please.
Okay, I think you all are worried about the same old faces and, you know, not getting anywhere, but I think you should look around. 3 years ago, we wouldn't have had this many people at an event like this.
Very true.
We wouldn't have had this kind of panel and this kind of discussion and these kinds of subjects coming up. So I think great progress has been made, and I think you need to pass pat yourselves on the back because we'll make it, and you've got a great group to start off with.
That's very true. She's right.
Barbara's
She's-
always